for VMS companies from a business perspective. So Daniel, what do you think are the challenges for VMS companies?
Well, we've been working in the last 25 years with lots of VMS companies because that's mainly our market. And what we've seen in the last period, that the pace of change has been increasing. In the past, there were pretty stable frameworks, technologies, 4GLs and so forth. And it was pretty easy to balance the challenges from the market side with what you needed to do internally from a technical perspective to fulfill those needs at the customers. Lately, what we see is that the speed is picking up and is driven by multiple things. On the customer side, there's more expectation for integration, different regulation standards. Consumerization is a driving force because users are having a different experience with their devices at home, so they expect something similar at work. And also on the technology side, technologies are moving faster. There are more and more user interface technologies which are coming. And for a vertical market software company, it's sometimes harder to keep up with all the changes and also stay ahead of the market, because also increased competition is one big issue. So basically the big challenge is, in one word, a higher speed of change. The way to manage that is actually to focus on the key things that you need to do, and that's mostly really following the market and staying ahead of the competition and being close to your customers.
In terms of technology, do you think things like cloud have a big impact, or artificial intelligence and things like that have an impact on these challenges?
Yeah, well, actually on artificial intelligence we haven't seen a lot yet. On cloud, on the other hand, there are also multiple driving forces which are pushing product companies towards the cloud. Some of them are just technical advantages, and you know quite a lot of them, but the fact that you want to address a broader set of users than in the past. You want to have a way to deploy your product which is simple, and usually it's on the web right now. So all of that are pushing the product companies to move towards the cloud. And also from the customer perspective, the acceptance of the cloud is much bigger. I remember discussing many years ago about putting some critical applications in the cloud, and the first attitude was, no way, we'll never put financial applications in the cloud, we'll never do this or do that. Now that the big horizontal players are out there, like Salesforce, Oracle, all of the other ERP, CRM players are out there, also business consumers, business users are expecting the more niche players, the product companies, to follow suit and to be in the cloud. And it's also, we've been discussing in the past, the issue of security, because in a way, they know that your data should be more secure in the Amazon cloud than on premise.
Right.
Now, of course, there are risks everywhere, but at least Amazon is investing a different type of money to secure their cloud than you can afford to invest as an IT manager at a certain enterprise.
That's very interesting, because sometimes specific technologies are targeted towards a specific area, like cloud was targeted towards cost efficiency and so on. But in the end, they have an impact, but because of completely different reasons, like the recent ransomware attacks and hackers and so on. So kind of customers would want to get rid of all the infrastructure they own and, let's say, manage, and make somebody else responsible for that. How about regulation changes in terms of budgeting impact? We are seeing in Europe a lot of decentralization, a lot of budget cuts, which probably is a trend that is going to persist. But we are also hearing a lot of discussions about high cost in markets like healthcare and pharmacy and so on. Do you see anything about existing customer budgets that have a big impact on technology and infrastructure?
Yeah, well, for sure, you have to start at the end of the chain, and you have to start with the end customers, which are the enterprise customers. And because, especially in the public world, they are feeling the pain in terms of healthcare, local governments, and so forth. The fact that they are pushing back on costs is driving the vertical market software companies to be more efficient and more creative in how they serve those markets, and even come with different pricing arrangements, not just the classic licenses, but also moving towards SaaS, pay-per-usage, all those things which actually align them to the real needs of the market. So yes, I think cost pressure is a big driver of innovation in general. And the cloud is an answer to that, because you can deploy stuff in a centralized way. It should be cheaper, easier to maintain, deploy, manage your applications. And of course, it comes with a lot of technical challenges, because not all applications are ready for the cloud, and they are not all ready for multi-tenancy. So we see a lot of VMS companies either having gone there already or preparing to go that route, because again, the challenge is bigger, and their own customers no longer want to host the applications in their systems. And that's a big push for innovation.
So do you think, for instance, that especially in let's say, vertical markets that are very hard to let's say, compete in, do you think, like in pharmacies, they should be fearful of change? I mean, maybe if I'm a big company and I have most of the customers, high-paying customers, I shouldn't be worried about technology and changes, because there is not a lot that can disrupt my business.
Well, in a certain way, the businesses are not easily disrupted, because they have a huge amount of data, a huge amount of processes implemented in their software, so it's not easy to replicate that. Though there are, in different markets, different situations where there are companies coming up with lots of money trying to do that. On the other hand, what we've seen is the competition usually comes from the UI part. So let's say you can never, or you can hardly replicate a big monolithic system and cover all the functionality with a new product, or if you do it, it takes a lot of time and money to do it, but you can always do something which attracts the users, like a portal, something which helps them manage their own health, or connects to some open source or to some open standards at the government level. So in that perspective, what we see is that if the big players in the, well, public sphere, because we're talking about the public one, if they don't keep up in terms of innovation and approaching more and more customers, broadening their user base, there is this threat of startups coming in on the user side, starting from the portal, not starting from the back end, and creating an ecosystem which makes it attractive for companies to be there.
So practically, if you're not feeling challenged and doing proactive work, you will probably at some point have to deal with attrition in some.
Exactly, and attrition is an issue, and again, what we've seen is in the past companies were comparing products on the basis of features, and now the emotional factor of how you feel when you work with a product, or how cool the biggest parts or the most important parts of the product are, that's playing a bigger and bigger role. And we've heard lots of stories on the market about that companies are actually moving in that direction of following more the UI design, the more process-driven approach in products. So whoever is innovating there will have an advantage on the market.
Right. So practically, even if, let's say, not facing a very fearful competition, the image of the customers, the image you kind of project to the customer is kind of important and can have a direct impact in terms of attrition, but also the fact that the environment changes around you. Things like new security threats create different context. Things like constraints in terms of budgeting for public sectors, for healthcare sectors, kind of forces new kinds of solutions. We are talking about self-services, more and more self-services being developed as a way to allow others to cut costs, to allow other customers, of course, to cut costs, but also in terms of legislation, because not only in Europe, we are seeing, let's say, a bigger effort around the digital part of the business, things like data protection, things like happening. So in a way, it seems that there is no easy period for vertical market software either. So even if you are not necessarily threatened by startups in your area, you still have a lot of things moving because of legislation or just environment changes.
Exactly, and I think there's a basic rule of competition which says you shouldn't focus on competition, you should focus on customers. And I think the big challenge is to create an environment to have a real lean vertical market software company which is able to follow the market very closely and be responsive to their customers. And the way you do that internally, either through a very agile internal team or through separate teams, one for initiatives, one for the core product management, or with a partner outside who can take responsibility. The fact is it's important to have the capability to move fast on this market and to respond quickly to what the market demands of you.
So practically, because you are forced to invest more because of legislation changes or so on, you have to make sure you're much more agile and leaner in the way you do the investment, making sure that you spend less money with higher impact than probably the competition together.
I would say you're not necessarily forced to invest more. Is what you said later.
Invest
you're
more
forced
often, let's say.
more, in shorter cycles and wiser. I mean, more effective than in the past.
I meant yes, in shorter cycles because of those changes in terms of legislation, in terms of having to discover or deliver more innovative ways to solve certain challenges, like the self-services part and so on.
Yeah, and actually one more thing to add, because we talked about these shorter cycles, that also puts pressure on the team, on the staff that you have as a company, because there might be periods when you need to scale up fast and then go back and maintain your earlier costs, and that requires also more flexibility. Besides the fact that there's a lot of competition on the IT market in general for great developers, if you want to move ahead and stay on top of technology, you might need much more varied or more types of technologies than in the past. And also the capacity to scale up and scale down faster, which is very important for being competitive.
Right. By the way, do you think that, for instance, the typical investment curve that used to be true 10 or 20 years ago, is it still valid? I mean, if you're investing in a new version of the product, you're probably going to be able to monetize it for the following 10, 20 years from now on? Or
well, again, I think also there, the principle is the same, but the duration is shorter. And we've seen examples, we talked in a different context about migrations. And we've seen situations where you make a big commitment on a new platform and it takes 5 years to port your application, and by the time you're done,
it's already deprecated.
It's already old, and you put it on the market and it's not new anymore. So it's also about prioritizing and pushing faster or more often versions to the market and focusing on what's really important.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.